Just take a few seconds and tell them, what would it take for you to uproot, move all the way to the other side of the world? Go. All right, you can wrap it up in the next several seconds. So what were some of your responses, thoughts? What would it take for you to be willing to uproot and move all the way to the other side of the world? Just holler it out. What did you tell the person you're sitting beside?
Future for my kids.
Future for your kids. Okay, a better future. Good. What else? So God's calling, taking you somewhere else. Good. So a better future for your kids, God's calling. Going to assume some of our answers. Dean, go ahead.
A crisis of conscience that's putting on you where you are.
Okay.
Like, for instance, you're in the army or something.
Fair enough. You be the person to tell us about that? Good. So a crisis of conscience. You're maybe not living where and how you feel you should be living. God's call, better future for your kids. Gonna guess some other answers might include, if we're talking about things that are here in this world that we're trying to get away from, it might be war, it might be famine. There's all kinds of reasons to uproot and move, but in all reality, we as a people here, I'm gonna guess that we're all gonna be in the same boat. We can't quite envision doing this. We've been living here. And for most of us, I'm going to say here, as in the Holmes County area, we've been living here for 200 plus years. Our people have been here for a long time. And so the concept of uprooting everything and moving to the completely different side of the world, it's so foreign to us, we almost can't quite wrap our heads around it. This past Monday, I had the opportunity to go to Greece with a school group. We took a bunch of the seniors over to an island called Lesvos in Greece. And it was part of a senior trip. We were there for about a week or so, and we spent some time on the island working with an organization called I-58. And I-58's whole mission is that they work with the current refugee crisis. And what they do is they basically they help staff a refugee camp. And this refugee camp provides shelter, provides clothing, provides food for people who have uprooted everything and moved for a lot of the same reasons that we just said. Some of them are fleeing war. Some of them are moving for a better future for their kids. Some of them may feel God's calling. But we got to be with people who, for the questions that we just asked, were not hypotheticals. They were real questions that they had to grapple with and that they had to answer. And so there's this unique route that's been happening over the last about 10 years or so. In roughly 2015, 13, 14, the refugee crisis really began. And so this is a map of Greece. And a lot of the refugees that are migrating from nations that they're trying to get away from, which often include countries like Syria, might include Yemen. In the camp currently in I-58, there were even some refugees from Ukraine. We're trying to get away from the war happening in Ukraine currently. A lot of the routes that are being taken by this current group of refugees over the last 10 years is that they travel across Turkey. And then if you can see on the map, there's a few small dots on the Greek islands right next to Turkey. And some of the main ones, the dot all the way at the top, is showing a refugee camp on the island of Lesvos called Moria. And Moria has been kind of a landing spot for a lot of refugees simply because they have a goal, a lot of these refugees do. They want to get to a European Union nation. And Greece is about the furthest east, the closest European Union nation they can get to. And to cross over from Turkey into Greece, they have to cross over a little body of water. And Lesvos, the island where Moria sits, it's a pretty short distance to get from mainland Turkey over to a European Union nation of Greece. And so this refugee camp, Moria, has housed thousands of people over the last 10 years. People that, again, have decided that it was worth it to uproot everything and move to escape something or for a brighter future. And so for a lot of these refugees, Germany is kind of the main target land where they want to go. Germany tends to have the best social programs. It has the most job opportunities. And so Germany is the promised land. That's where they want to get to. But regardless, if they actually get to Germany or not, many of them get stuck in Greece, or they might end up being sent to another nation in the European Union somewhere. Regardless if they make it to Germany or not, that's still a big challenge because they're coming from a completely different background. They don't know the language. They need to assimilate into a brand new culture, trying to bring their customs, blend it with a new culture, learn a new language, find a new job, all in a completely foreign homeland in which they might not even be very welcome. That's a challenge. And it's one that we, again, almost can't wrap our heads around because we've been so safe and comfortable here for the last 200, 300 years. But in all reality, our ancestors our faith ancestors, and some of our ancestors as well, had a background that looked very similar to this. A lot of these refugees are crossing over that little body of water to Lesbos in these little rubber dinghies. And our ancestors didn't come in rubber dinghies, they came in big wooden ships. Pretty much all of us, I'm going to guess, can trace our history back to a few main people, and most of them are going to make their way over from either France or Germany. They're going to make a perilous 6-week journey across the Atlantic where they uproot everything, leave behind their homes, and move all the way over for the sake of a better future for their kids, a crisis of conscience, God's call, escaping war, and escaping persecution. So we can't wrap our heads around this, but our people did it roughly 200 years ago. Their route looked very different. They sailed across the entire Atlantic to get to the New World, but they still did it. And so the problem was, like we said, let's say someone actually makes it to Germany. There's still the problem of trying to bring your own customs and your own culture and learn a new language and do all these things in a new land. Our people had the exact same challenges when they first arrived. And it's kind of funny to note, in today's world, the refugees, they want to get to Germany. Our ancestors, we wanted to get out of Germany. We wanted to leave and get out of that place and come to the new world where all the opportunities were. The problem was, what soon happened hereafter is that when our ancestors came, the Mennonites and the Amish came, they were trying to escape the pressures of a physical kingdom. They were trying to get away from the oppression of a king in either Germany or France or wherever they were at, a duke, a ruler, whatever it was. But boy, oh boy, did they step into a hotbed of issues and challenges. America wasn't always the promised land that it was now. They had issues. They had challenges. And so our goal this morning is to take a look at how did the Mennonites and the Amish actually come through all of this and end up here and go through two major challenges, two major wars. And so with that in mind, before we get to it, let's pause and take a quick look at Deuteronomy. And if you have a Bible, turn with me to Deuteronomy chapter 6. I'm going to read out of the ESV. In Deuteronomy 6, we have the account of Moses speaking to the children of Israel before they enter into their new land. Up until this point, the children of Israel had been wandering around the desert for 40 years, and they're about to enter into the promised land, the land where they were going. They were refugees wandering around, not in rubber dinghies, not in big wooden ships, but they were refugees wandering and about to make it into their promised land. Moses couldn't go with them, but he had some firm instructions for them before they entered. Let's read the first 6 verses of Deuteronomy 6. It says this, "Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land which you are going over to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son's son, by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be long. Hear, therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart." We know this passage very well. It's the Shema. But it's being said to them, to the children of Israel, as they're about to step into a new land with new challenges and all kinds of new opportunities ahead of them. It's the land flowing with milk and honey, right? But God says, through Moses, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. This is the same message that the Anabaptists, the Amish, and the Mennonites, as they're coming over to this new world, that they're bringing with them. How do they love the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, and might in this brand new land? That's their goal. And so keep that idea in mind. Again, we kind of can't wrap our heads around this concept of trying to integrate into somewhere new. But they were trying to integrate somewhere new, and to do that, still loving the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, and might. So a little bit of background context first. If you go back to Europe, before we had the Mennonites and the Amish moving over, if you go back to Europe, there's going to be a lot of persecution still happening. There's essentially three main groups of Anabaptists by this point. We're talking the 1600s. You're going to have the group of Anabaptists that all of us are probably coming out of. And our group is going to be primarily going to be driven from Switzerland, and they're all going to be settling into kind of two different areas here. There's a region of France called the Alsace-Lorraine region, and there's also another region of Germany called the Palatinate. And basically, most of the people that we come from, if you're a true Holmes Countyite, are going to come from one of these two regions. After a lot of the Swiss Anabaptists, the Swiss Brethren, after they are driven out of Switzerland, they go north and settle here. The boundaries wouldn't look like the same as they do today, but in modern-day France and in modern-day Germany. There's another group of Anabaptists, the Mennonites, that are going to be in the Netherlands. And then a few Sundays ago, we talked about the Russian Mennonites and their migration as they go to Poland and then Russia and Ukraine and so on. So we kind of have three main settlements, and today we're essentially going to zoom in on the ones that are us, the ones that are our ancestors coming from this part of Europe. So they're going to be resettling into these areas, but they're not going to be very welcome. There's a bunch of different dukes and duchies and everything else that are going to be controlling this part of Europe. And even though the Mennonites are welcome, they're not necessarily welcome. There's going to be heavy taxation for the sake of being an Anabaptist. There's going to be a lot of pressure to not evangelize. The group of Anabaptists, the Mennonites that were living in the Netherlands, we're not talking about them specifically, but they had some stuff constrained on them where they were not allowed to ring a church bell, because that might draw people to their services. They were not allowed to have the doors to their churches face the main streets. They always had to have the doors in the back alleys to make sure that this Anabaptism thing is kept down low. So a lot of the similar stuff was happening to our ancestors in Alsace-Lorraine and also in the Palatinate. And so they're not necessarily getting killed like they were in Switzerland anymore, but they're still not necessarily welcome. And so if you hop across the pond, go up north into England, there's another group, kind of like our theological cousins, called the Quakers. They're also kind of non-resistant, and they have some of the same ideals and values that the Anabaptists do, but they're primarily going to be coming from England. Well, there was a nobleman who had a son. His name was William. And William Penn became a Quaker. Now, he was a nobleman. His family was pretty wealthy. They were respected in England. And so the king of England at the time actually owed William's family money. So rather than repaying the debt, he said, hey, how about I just give your family a big chunk of land over in America, in the New World, and that'll repay our debt. And so the family said, sure, we'll take it. And so there was a big chunk of land given to William Penn. It was not nice land. In fact, it was called a sylvan, which is basically a big forest. It means wooded. And so Penn's sylvan was Penn's woods that was given to them as repayment for a debt owed to them by the King of England. But William Penn took this land, and he was a Quaker. And he had these ideals of having a spot where all of these Quakers, Anabaptists, whoever else is being persecuted for their faith, let's all go there. We'll all live, and we'll have freedom of worship. We'll have freedom of religion. We'll all try to get along. It was called the Holy Experiment. And it's kind of neat. Now, we can obviously connect the dots. Penn's sylvan is the forerunner to the modern-day state of Pennsylvania. But this was the idea that, hey, maybe there's a spot where we Quakers, Anabaptists, Amish, Mennonites, whatever else, there's a spot where we can go and where we can actually just practice our faith in peace and not be taxed for it, not be persecuted for it, not be mocked for it. And so there's this unique idea that Penn had, and he decided to build a city. It was called Philadelphia. And if you are diving into like your Greek prefixes, philo means love. And so it's basically the city of brotherly love. And when this was first being built in the 1600s, William Penn had these grand ideals. He's like, all right, if you're going to come to Pennsylvania, you're going to live, and you're going to live right. You're going to be in Philadelphia. You are supposed to not swear. You're not supposed to have any elements of adultery. You're supposed to lead very quiet, modest lives. And that's still a requirement in Philadelphia, as evidenced by their victory after the Super Bowl in this past year. Just kidding. Obviously, time has gone by, and the elements of Penn's holy experiment have changed throughout the years. But that was the idea. And so these Anabaptists, our forefathers that are living in the Palatinate and in Alsace-Lorraine, they say, all right, we'll take you up on that. And they come. The first Mennonite church, it's going to be a group of Mennonites, was led by a gentleman named Francis Pastorius, and they arrived in 1683. And they're going to settle in Philadelphia. And they're actually going to build a town basically right next to Philadelphia called, creatively enough, Germantown. Bet you can't guess where they were from. And so they settled and they built their new town, and this was like the first Mennonite city, the first Mennonite church is going to land here in Penn's holy experiment in 1683. Now, for about 40 to 50 years, they're actually going to be the biggest group of immigrants coming into Pennsylvania. And so there are going to be Mennonites going to make up about 1/3 of the population of Penn's holy experiment until about 1727. 1727, the word's kind of going to get out, and a lot of Amish are going to start to move into Pennsylvania. A lot of other religious groups, even if they're not being persecuted, are going to start moving over from Europe into Penn's holy experiment as well. And by about the 1720s to 30s, Mennonites are going to start to be outnumbered pretty heavily. Quakers, Amish, whoever else is going to be coming over, they're no longer going to be the majority. But for a while there, Pennsylvania was pretty heavily Mennonite. And so eventually, things settle in, and there's kind of like this unique, successful experiment happening for a little bit. Penn's holy experiment kind of works. There's going to be 3 main groups, among others. You're going to have Quakers, you're going to have the Amish and the Mennonites, or the Anabaptists, we could say, and you're going to have a lot of Calvinists that are going to be settling into this area. And sometimes they would all share a church house. I don't know if they were all worshiping together, or if that meant kind of like for when Crosspoint first began, we used to share this place with the Brethren Church. They would have church from, let's say, 9 to 10:30, and we had church from 10:30 to 12. So I don't know if they all had like their staggered times in the same church building, or if they all just got together and worshiped. I'm not sure. But basically, there was this time where everyone kind of religiously speaking could hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Didn't last very long, unfortunately, and something's going to develop here. So we've been studying over the past several weeks now about how aggressively our Anabaptist forefathers evangelized, right? When they were being persecuted, they were doing well. Numbers would grow. But something's going to happen when all of these Anabaptists move to the New World, because suddenly they're not going to evangelize to the same degree. They're not going to have that same passion to spread the word. And there could be a variety of reasons for this. Remember, they've been persecuted for years. If you're facing persecution for hundreds of years by now, 200 years, eventually you might learn to keep your mouth shut. Maybe that's part of it. I'd also like to guess that probably all this religious freedom probably also had a bit of an effect. Because Mennonites and Amish, we were able to come to the New World. We were able to come to Pennsylvania and freely worship. But that meant we also had to respect what other people were doing. We couldn't go and tell them, hey, you're wrong. There's freedom of worship. And so these two things might kind of combine to take some of that evangelistic zeal out of the early Amish and the Mennonites, because the numbers are not going to grow unless they're growing through families nearly to the same degree that they were when the Amish and the Mennonites were being persecuted back in Europe. And so things are going to slowly start to kind of withdraw. Mennonites are going to be outnumbered, and we're not going to be adding to the group in the same way that we were before. In fact, due to all of this like mixing, a lot of the Mennonite numbers went down, and they were starting to assimilate with other versions of Christianity. There's a really big movement among the Calvinists called Pietism. And pietism was this idea, like very emotional, very spiritual, religious experiences and conversions and so on. And I mean, I think the Amish and the Mennonites today are still accused of probably not being very spiritually emotional. And so it was even more so back in the 1700s. And so these Calvinists are coming along who are very spiritually emotional. They're in tune with the Holy Spirit. And a lot of the early Mennonites, they're awash with all this religious freedom. And hey, that looks pretty nice. And so a lot of them became Calvinists. And so the Mennonites are going to suffer a little bit from that religious freedom promise that they were able to have. Now, along with that, there are a lot of early challenges. Again, like we said, eventually the Quakers, the Mennonites, and the Amish are going to be outnumbered in Pennsylvania. We're kind of like theological cousins. We all had our same goals in mind. The Quakers were generally non-resistant. Anabaptists were clearly non-resistant. So they kind of got along. And the Quakers, because William Penn was a Quaker, often kind of controlled a lot of what was happening in Pennsylvania. And so, we were able to use the government to kind of effectively keep our Anabaptist and Quaker ideals in place. But there's going to be this really big thing that is going to come back to the fact that our faith ancestors were refugees who didn't know what they were doing. When William Penn first established Pennsylvania and immigrants came over, they had to sign an oath when they first arrived. And this oath essentially said that we will be loyal to the king, the crown of England. Okay. The problem was, remember, our faith ancestors were German for the most part. They would have I can't even speak in English. They would have spoken and written in German, or whatever version of German they would have had at the time. This oath, this piece of paper, and again, remember, they're coming to a brand new world. They're signing documents. Yeah, we're here we go. There was an oath slid in there. And this oath said that we will respect and favor the crown of England. Okay. They didn't know what they were signing. It was in English. And so it was written. It was signed. A lot of them didn't realize it until there's going to be a war that breaks out. There are two major challenges that these early Amish and Mennonites are going to face. There's a war that we don't know that much about in all reality because it didn't affect America that much. But before the Revolutionary War, there was a war between France and England. And now we can pretty much throw a stone on a timeline of history and expect to hit a war between France and England. They're pretty much always fighting. But there was a war that broke out in the New World as well, called the French and Indian War. And it's called that because that's who the English and the Americans were fighting. They were fighting the French and the Indians. And so it's not that they were fighting each other. But in the French and Indian War, you've got a war that's being fought in the New World for the sake of protecting all of these English immigrants that are living there. The British Army is going to be fighting to protect them from the French and from the Indians, who are also in the New World. And so it's going to lead to a bit of a faith challenge because of the fact, again, that they signed an oath saying, yep, we'll support the crown. Well, during the war, a lot of these Amish and the Mennonites, they had kind of settled on the frontier edges. Remember, we're good at farming. That's kind of our strength. So they brought those farming skills with them. And so a lot of these Amish and Mennonites, as they kept coming over, they didn't settle in Philadelphia. They didn't settle in Germantown. They settled on the frontier areas where you had big chunks of land that you could farm. And due to being on the frontier areas and away from the towns, a lot of these Amish and Mennonites ended up getting captured and killed during the French and Indian War. When I say a lot, I mean several hundred or so, which is a lot, but not like thousands upon thousands. But a lot of these frontier Amish and Mennonites, they're away from the protection of a town, and so they're often the first ones to go. If there's a resistance, an uprising of Indians and French, kind of nipping at the edges of British territory. That's where the Amish and the Mennonites are. And so many are going to be kidnapped or killed during this time. Many Mennonites are going to start making maybe some compromises where, because of the oath they signed, they didn't fight, but they still provided supplies. Remember, they're raising food. They're good farmers. They would provide supplies for the military, the British military. And so they're trying to grapple with, we actually are a part of this now. We signed an oath that will help out here. And so that was their way of helping out, providing some supplies. But thankfully, a lot of these Amish and Mennonites were able to still keep their non-resistance during the French and Indian War. In fact, there's this amazing story of a gentleman named Jacob Hostetler. I'm not sure how his name was supposed to be said. He was an Amish man who was going to be living in a settlement called Northkill. It's going to be kind of north of Philadelphia by a little bit. They're going to be settling in Northkill, and on September 19th, 1757, so towards the onset of the French and Indian War, one night, they had what they called a frolic, which is kind of similar to what I think our youth group probably has today. They got together and they played volleyball. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know what they played. But they got together and they peeled apples. They were going to dry apples. And it was kind of tradition that whenever a family was going to dry apples, then the rest of the community would come together and they would help peel them and press them and dry them. And then afterwards, they would have a frolic. All the young people would stay and they would, I'm assuming, sit around a fire. I don't know what people did for fun in 1757, but they would get together and have a frolic. Well, time goes by and everyone goes home. By the middle of the night, there was a sound that happened outside. The family dog, the Hostetler family dog, started making some weird noises. And so one of the sons of Jacob Hostetler, his name was Joseph, opened the door to see what was going on, and immediately took a shot in the leg. And he realized, oh, they're under attack. This is one of those frontier areas. And so they were under attack by a band of about 7 to 10 Native Americans and also 3 French. He quickly swung the door shut, locked it. And the family could look out the window, and they could see these Native Americans and the French standing outside in their courtyard. But thankfully for them, there was very little moon that night. And so the attackers couldn't see in the house, but the people inside the house could look out. Well, remember Joseph was shot in the leg, and so he's needing to very quietly deal with a musket ball in his leg, and the whole family sat for the rest of the night, hiding in the house, hoping that the attackers wouldn't come in. Now, they had guns, they had ammunition, they were really good hunters. According to the Hostetler family history, there were 2 sons. One was named Christian, one was named Jacob, at least older sons. And they were both excellent marksmen. And they grabbed their guns and they said, hey, Dad, I bet we can take at least a few of them before they make it into the house. And Jacob, he was an Amishman, said, absolutely not. We are not going to do that. They wait out the rest of the night. And again, according to the Hostetler family history, the 2 sons, Joseph and Christian, again said, Dad, please, we can take him. Nope. It is not our call to take a human life. Well, the morning comes, and they can see outside, and unfortunately, the band of attackers could also see inside. And so they decided, the attackers did, that rather than try to storm the house, they're just going to set fire to it. And so they set fire to the Hostetler family house, and the family inside, they grab jugs of cider, and they run into the fruit cellar that was underneath the house. And they used cider to try to douse flames that were coming for them, and they hid underneath the floorboards in the fruit cellar. They doused the floorboards in cider to try to keep the flames away, and they hid for as long as they could, until eventually there was so much smoke, they realized they had to get out. There was a window to the fruit cellar, and looking out the window, they couldn't see any Native Americans or any French. And so most of the family climbed out, and they were going to make a run for the woods. And this is a dark story. I'm sorry to laugh, but according to the exact wording of the story that I read, the mother was, and I quote, a fleshy woman, and she got stuck in the window. In the commotion, there was one Native American, his name was Tom Lyons, at least that's what he was called later on, who was still happening to be eating peaches on the other side of the house. They didn't see him, because they couldn't see through the window and find the one Native American that was left. He heard the commotion. He came running over. And he raised the alarm for all the rest of the Native Americans and the French to come back. The family runs back, and the Native Americans run back, and they see the mother, to be Jacob Hostetler's wife, along with a young daughter, and Jacob Jr., a young son, all stabbed and scalped. They captured Jacob, the dad. They captured Joseph and Christian, the 2 sons, took them with them. And the sons all became captives. The dad, Jacob, he was a captive for approximately a year, and he was deemed a safe captive. And so they would give him a gun. Say, all right, you go hunt stuff. They realized, okay, well, this guy we don't have to worry about, that's great, you know? Clearly he had non-resistant elements to him even outside of his house. And so they said, hey, give him a gun, let him go do his stuff. And he would shoot food and provide, he would hunt and provide food for his captors. The sons, I'm not sure what happened to them. But eventually, about a year or two later, Jacob would stow away little bits of food. He would stow away little bits of musketry every once in a while, some balls and gunpowder. And eventually, he decided to make a break for it. And he ran one night from the camp of the French and the Indians that he was with. He ran all the way to the Susquehanna River, the big river that runs close to Lancaster through Harrisburg. And he built a little raft. He hopped on that raft and he sailed for 4 days until eventually someone found him. And they brought him ashore and said, "What happened?" And he told the whole story. How he was an Amish man, did not take the life of the French and the Indians that came, who took the life of his wife and 2 children. Time goes by, and he makes an appeal to the governor of Pennsylvania and says, "Hey, can you please help me get my boys back?" Well, interestingly enough, his boys, they were taken into the fold of the Native Americans. And there's a very unique story. Firstly, Christian, he was exchanged back in a prisoner swap. The French and Indian War ends, and the British are going to win. But after the war ends, he's given back in a prisoner swap. But he had spent about 7 years living with the Native Americans. He was very good at hunting and fishing, didn't actually really want to come back to the English side of things. But he ended up coming back and marrying and getting land and everything else. The other son, his name was Joseph, the one who was shot in the leg that first night. His story is wild. He also was taken in by the Native Americans. He became a very good Native American. And there's a story of him at the end of the war. He made it all the way out to Ohio. And he decided, you know what? He's going to go back after the war, and he's going to see if he can find his dad. Well, Jacob, the father, he had gone back to the original home that was burned. And he rebuilt it. I believe he remarried. Don't quote me on that. But he had kind of built another life. Joseph is going to come. He's going to find the house. He's going to find the land. He is a Native American. He's dressed in Native American garb. His hair is in the style of a Native American. He knocks on the door. He can barely speak German anymore. He knocks on the door, and Jacob, the elder statesman who refused to take a life of a Native American and the French that first night, he opens the door, sees a Native American, and if I would be him, I think my initial response would be like, "Oh no, I know what you did." He opens the door, asks him if he needs food. He says, "Sure." And so they were eating supper at the time. He brought him a plate, gave it to him, invited him to come inside, and Joseph, who was, could barely speak German anymore, he said, "No, he'll eat outside." So he took it out, sat on a stump. Jacob comes out, says, "Hey, how are you? Tell me about yourself." And in broken English, he says, "My name is Joseph Hostetler." It's a son. And so he refused to take a life that first night. And what's interesting is that these sons went on to become, I don't know if they were Amish and Mennonite, but they went on to become pastors in the church. And they spread that message of non-resistance. And it became like this rallying story for the Hostetler family and the North Hill community, saying, hey, we did not bend and buckle and break during the French and Indian War. That's powerful. Now, fast forward, and just down the road, a few years later, we're going to have this crisis of conscience, like Dean says, because I, for one, love American history. I love studying about the Revolutionary War and the stories of bravery and history that come out of it. Well, for the Mennonites and Amish that settled here in the 16 and 1700s, this is right next door. Remember Germantown, the first Mennonite church? That's now a suburb of Philadelphia. Philadelphia was the seat of the Continental Congress. This is where the early founding fathers are doing their thing. They have a front row seat for the American Revolution. And we all know the story. Declaration of Independence is signed and shared on July 4th, 1776. They have a new America, a new nation. Well, right next door in Germantown and North Kill and Lancaster by now and all these other areas in Pennsylvania, we've got a whole bunch of our faith ancestors who all signed their names saying that they're going to support the king. And it's going to lead to a crisis where they're not sure what exactly they're going to do. And so the Mennonites are going to be set apart during this time for two things. Firstly, they're going to be set apart because they're not going to take up arms. Patriotic fever is running all over this part of the world, and they said, nope, we're not going to take up arms. And secondly, not only are they not going to take up arms, a lot of these Amish and Mennonites, we kind of look at this and be like, ugh. They remain loyal to the British. And some of them were reasons because they, unknowingly took an oath, will fulfill that oath. Some of the reasons were not so good. But they decided, you know what? A lot of Mennonites decided we're going to stay loyal to the British and we're not going to take up arms. The first one, we can kind of be like, okay, well, good. Good for you guys. Good for not taking up arms. The second one, we're like, oh boy, you supported Britain during the Revolutionary War? Well, a lot of them did. And so clearly, during this time, they're going to be pretty unpopular among the patriots because not only are you not fighting, you're even going as far as to support the British. So time goes by. July 4th, 1776, Declaration of Independence is signed, but the war actually lasts for quite a few years yet after this. And so the next year, 1777, all of these people in Pennsylvania are going to face two major crises. Firstly, the government, Pennsylvania state government, they're going to enlist a draft saying, hey, all able-bodied men between 18 and 53 have to go register and be eligible to be drafted into the state militia because we're going to need you to go fight against the British. Well, obviously, this is not going to be something that our early Mennonites and Amish are going to be able to do. That means fighting and it means opposing Britain. So a lot of them didn't. The second challenge was that the state government also said, hey, you're going to actually have to sign a new oath that's going to supersede that old oath that you signed when you first came. So this new oath had some pretty specific wording. Now here's the text for it. It says this, I, and then you as the person who were taking the oath, and by the way, every citizen had to take this oath. I, insert your name, do swear that I renounce and refuse all allegiance to George III, King of Great Britain, his heirs and successors, and that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as a free and independent state, and that I will not at any time do or cause to be done any matter or thing that will be prejudicial or injurious to the freedom and independence thereof, as declared by Congress. And also that I will discover and make known to some justice of the peace of said state all treasons or traitorous conspiracies which I now know or hereafter shall know to be formed against this or any of the United States of America. That's some strong wording. Well, Amish and Mennonites don't sign this thing for a whole host of reasons. Again, you've got taking up arms, you've got the fact that it's an oath, which they're not necessarily comfortable signing or taking, and also the fact that it's going against Britain, that they said they'll support. And so very few Amish and Mennonites enlisted for the draft or signed the oath. In fact, it's funny. There's official documentation that says that the whole draft thing simply fell apart in the Lancaster County area because no one did it. In the early stages of this, you could simply pay a fee for someone else to be drafted in your place. And this led to a great crisis of conscience. Like Mennonites would get together and be like, what do we do? Because we can't go fight. And if we pay the money, someone else is just going to go and fight for us. And so what do we do? And they said, all right, we'll pay the fine. So a lot of money was sent to the state government because none of these Amish and Mennonites would go fight. And at first, that was enough to kind of satisfy the government. Time goes by, they need more people, they need more money. And so that fine keeps getting higher and higher. And you know what's funny? The wording of some of those official documentation was changed later on. At first, it was a fine. Later on, it became a tax because Amish and Mennonites were okay paying taxes, but they weren't okay fighting. So it then became a fighting tax. All right, we're fine paying the fighting tax. That will do because it kind of took away that crisis of conscience of someone else going and fighting in your place. It's now just a tax you pay to not go fight. Okay, that we can do. And so they paid the tax and things kept kind of sliding on by, but eventually things are going to start coming to a head. Fighting is going to be happening very, very close to where these main areas are. Now, what's funny is that firstly, some Mennonites and Amish did what we've done so much for so many times. They just migrated. A lot of them went to Canada. In fact, if you're familiar with like the Kitchener-Waterloo area in Ontario, Canada, big Mennonite settlement, it all kind of started during the Revolutionary War because a lot of them fled Pennsylvania and decided to go settle in Ontario, in Canada, which was, not a land at war at the time. But anyway, time goes by, and the people who were not taking this oath, the Amish and the Mennonites, remember the wording of the oath said something along the lines of, I will turn in any traitors, conspirators, or anything like that. They started being turned in. And so the punishment for not taking the oath went from jail time, it went to confiscating your personal goods. Some of them resulted in public whippings. And in fact, according to one source, there was a scenario in which, bear with me. Here we go. There was a scenario in which a surgeon had to be on hand because the whippings that were being dealt out by the state government were getting so bad that a surgeon had to be there to help repair the wounds, and secondly, also say, hey, okay, he's had enough, he actually can't take anymore. And so these weren't just light slaps on the wrist for not taking this oath, these were major punishments. And so a lot of these Mennonites and Amish, though, they upheld the idea that they cannot swear an oath. Time goes by, and the fighting comes very close to home. Philadelphia, remember, that's right next to Germantown, the very first Mennonite church. It's going to be captured by the British in September of 1777. And there's going to be a battle called the Battle of Germantown, a well-known American Revolutionary War battle, happened in this town that was built by Mennonites. And so the fighting is happening right at home. There's a very interesting story about how Mennonite families, as the Americans by the way, Germantown was a defeat for the Americans, as they're being pushed back, supposedly Mennonite families, Mennonite children, would stand out on the roadways offering bowls of soup to the injured American troops as they're being taken back. Injured people were taken into farms, they were given shelter, they were taken care of, which is awesome. But along with that, there's going to be some other stories that are pretty heartbreaking as well. So for example, a lot of this fighting is also going to lead to a lot of dead. There's bodies everywhere. And thankfully, some of the main people who were out cleaning up the bodies, digging graves, were the Mennonites. They were the Amish. There's a story about a Mennonite pastor who had 3 sons, and right in their garden were several corpses. And so these boys, they were young boys, somewhere between the ages of 7 and 10. They ran out, they were looking at all these corpses, as you probably would, and they had some shiny buckles on their clothing. So they ran out, they took them. They brought them back and said, hey, Dad, look at these things. And there's Mennonite pastor father said, absolutely not. We're not even going to steal from a corpse. He made his sons go back, return the buckles to their clothing, pick up a shovel, and bury them. And so a lot of these Amish and Mennonites were able to maintain their non-resistance during this time frame, even when the fighting was happening right in their gardens and in their fields. Sadly, a lot of their farms are going to be used for supplies. They're going to be ransacked by both the British and the Americans. They're used for supplies. All right, you got some fruit, we're going to take it. You got animals, we're going to take them. So a lot of their goods were gone due to all the armies just going through and pillaging and taking everything they wanted. There's a terrible story of Martyrs' Mears, the book that Anabaptists are known for, the one that talks about all their persecution and their anti-war ideas. There's a building called the Ephrata Cloister, basically like a big nunnery or monastery, where a bunch of early Anabaptists had said, hey, could you guys print Martyrs' Mears for us? And at the time, in the 1700s, this was the biggest book ever made in the New World. It's 1,500 pages. It's a sucker that was massive. It took 3 guys, I believe 10 years or so, to print the number of Martyrs' Mears that the Anabaptists had ordered. Well, the fighting came close by and spilled into Lancaster. George Washington's troops came and they confiscated all of the unbound versions of the Martyrs' Mear that they could find. They tore them up and they used them as wadding for American guns. Stories of non-resistance and war were used to help shoot against the invading British. Well, time goes by, and eventually these ideas of Mennonites still being somewhat loyal and not fighting ended up taking a bit of a dark turn for their time. For example, there was a Mennonite minister who was thrown in jail after the Battle of Germantown for giving room and board to 3 injured British soldiers. There were 3 men close to death, and he couldn't take the fact that they were close to death on his farm. So he took them into his house, fed them, cared for them, nursed their wounds, thrown in jail. After Philadelphia was captured, some of these Mennonites may have made a few decisions that we look back, maybe scratch our head a little bit about. For example, when Philadelphia was British, remember this is right next door to a lot of these Amish and Mennonites, the Amish and Mennonites ended up taking their food and provisions that they still had, and they sold them to the British. And a lot of them wouldn't actually sell them to the American side, simply because at the time, the British, they're using currency of gold and silver. That stuff is good. The Americans, they're using an unbacked paper money that is essentially worthless if the Americans lose the war. And so a lot of these Mennonites, they sold to the British simply because they were using gold and silver. It was better for them. Now, there was an order that was eventually given to help fight against this thing about these Mennonites taking goods to the British, taking them to Philadelphia. There was an order given by a Quaker general in the American military. They were so tired of Americans driving livestock, cows and sheep and horses and whatever else, up to Philadelphia to sell to the British, that he gave an order that said, look, anytime you see a herd of animals, shoot them. If they're on the way to Philadelphia, shoot them all. If a person gets mixed in with it, it's fine. And this was a Quaker. Thankfully, there's no accounts of a Mennonite or Amish person getting shot, herding animals to Philadelphia. But there is a story of a young Mennonite farmer boy, 12 years old, who was running eggs and butter up to Philadelphia from the family farm to sell to the British. He's caught by an American. He's tried, and he takes him back to his father. And his father says, yeah, I was sending him to go sell eggs and butter. And so they take this 12-year-old boy, strip him down, tie him to a tree, and thankfully didn't shoot him, but they lined up a firing squad armed with eggs, the very eggs he was going to go sell to the British. And they egged him, left him tied to the tree for several hours to teach him a lesson. And so these Amish and these Mennonites are wildly unpopular. And this whole story is going to culminate with a story of 12 Mennonite men. And these 12 Mennonite men are going to be rounded up in June of 1778. So the British are going to hold Philadelphia for about 9 months, from September of 1777 to June of 1778. And eventually they're going to withdraw and they're going to go back and fight somewhere else. And people knew that Philadelphia is going to be open, and so the Americans are coming back. They're going to retake this place. And suddenly, all those Amish and Mennonites who were helping, selling stuff to the British, they're kind of at a mob disposal once the British are gone. And in the wake of this, 12 Mennonite men are going to be rounded up, and they're going to be tried, saying, hey, you helped the British. And they didn't really have a good defense. We kind of did. They sold goods to them. And so as a punishment, after a trial, it was decided that all of their goods are going to be sold, and they're going to be exiled, thrown out of the state. And so they were given 1 month to get their affairs in order. These were 12 Mennonite men. They had large families, and some of them had wives that were pregnant. Some of them had large farms. Didn't matter. They're given 1 month to get their affairs in order. An auction day came, and all the goods that they possibly had were sold. Bibles, books, silverware, even the iron ovens that were used for heat and for cooking, they were uprooted off the floor and they were sold. Now, some of these Mennonites would rally around each other and they would try to at least buy their Bibles so they could hang on to those. But most of their goods are sold. Pregnant women slept on floors the night after the auction. Families barely survived a harsh winter. They didn't have ovens. Children grew up without banished fathers, all because of the fact that they would not fight and would not sign this oath. The oath was what really got them. And so eventually, time goes by, and the war ends. And a lot of these punishments and these banishments and exiles, whatever else, those were all softened and usually kind of drawn back by the time the war was over. And after a while, though, the new American government became the new normal, and things kind of settled down a little bit. But there was a standard that was set in this Revolutionary War for patriotism. Like, hey, we are a country of patriots. We fight for freedom. We fight for our land. And with that, there was also a standard set of how we're going to treat those who are not patriots. There's other stories and other accounts in the next wars coming later. World War I, World War II, how the non-resistant Amish and Mennonites are going to be treated and viewed. A lot of these same elements that were present during the Revolutionary War are going to be present later on as well, because the standard is set. Now, what's interesting to note is that some Mennonites took the oath. They joined the war. Many joined on the side of the British. Some joined on the side of the Americans. But what's interesting is that we don't really remember their stories. We remember the stories and the impact of those who were able to stand non-resistant and maintain that call in Deuteronomy 6 of serving and loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and might. Those are the ones we remember. After the war, there was a doctor in Philadelphia whose name was Benjamin Rush, and he had a quote. He says, "Perhaps those Christians among us who refuse to bear arms for the purpose of shedding human blood may be preserved by divine providence as the center of a circle, which shall gradually embrace all nations of the earth in a perpetual treaty of friendship and peace. We don't remember the stories of those who joined, but we remember the stories and the impact of those who were able to stand up and say, nope, we're going to be loyal to the spiritual kingdom of Christ over the physical kingdom of either America or Great Britain. And so it's worth noting that these Mennonites were able to resist the call to take up arms. However, a lot of these early Americans, the ones that fought, they have stories of heroism, bravery, fighting, dying for a new free nation. And it sounds glorious, but ultimately they're fighting and dying for something that is still second to what the Amish and the Mennonites were fighting for. They were fighting and dying for a physical kingdom. And I hope that we still have the same energy to fight for a spiritual kingdom. And so if you look back at the oath and all those very firm pressures saying, hey, this is what you are not supposed to do, or this is what you have to do to fight for our new physical land, the Amish and the Mennonites, they resisted well. But in some ways, it might be kind of easy to look at that and say, all right, no, we can't be a part of that. They're trying to strong-arm us into their will. They're trying to strong-arm us into being a part of the physical kingdom. We can resist that. It's obvious. I'd question if we have a similar fight ahead of us today, but we're not being strong-armed into the physical kingdom. We're being welcomed with open arms into the physical kingdom, saying, join us. Your physical kingdom, your government, will accomplish your Christian ideals using the tools of government. And that has just never worked in all the history of the Anabaptists and in the history of the church. And so the struggle is not against oaths and fighting against the Americans or the British. The struggle is now making sure that we remember and maintain the call in Deuteronomy 6, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and might, not in times of hardship and in times where we have very clear lines between spiritual and physical kingdoms being drawn. We have to remember that we need to keep resisting even when the times are good. And so we're still refugees. We're not in dinghies. We're not in big wooden ships, but we're still refugees living in a physical kingdom working towards a spiritual one. And so let's make sure that as we maintain and as we continue on in 2025, that we keep that same rally, that same fervor, that same passion of all of those Amish and Mennonites from 1776. Let's let that be our call and our mission moving forward. Let's pray. God, we thank you for the history and the faith foundation that have been laid by the people that came before us. Lord, help us to remember that we are citizens of a spiritual kingdom first, before we are citizens of a physical kingdom. And we pray that you would help us to be able to focus on you before all else. We love you, Lord, and we thank you, we praise you. Pray you bless the rest of our morning as well. Be with the ensemble as they sing. Bless them for coming and sharing with us this morning. We love you, Lord, and we commit ourselves to you. In Jesus' name.